Welcome to the podcast Sold by Marco, giving you the current information you've got to know as a buyer, seller, or investor here in Denver. In this episode, we're going to talk about a rent back, what it is, why is it so important. I have conversations all the time with sellers and buyers who don't fully understand what rent backs are, or some of them haven't even heard of them. So I'm doing this episode to clear it up. What are they? Why are they so important? And how do they actually work? Let's talk about the name. Rent back is the term that is commonly used, but really the document is called a post-closing occupancy agreement. It's hard to say that fast. PCOA for short. Basically, a seller can ask for a buyer to give them time after they close to stay in the home. So the seller becomes the renter and the buyer becomes the landlord. This is very common, especially when sellers just need a little extra time to move out. A seller in the state of Colorado can legally stay in the home for up to 60 days as part of a rent back after closing, 2 months. So let's talk about what they cost. Everything's negotiable. So some buyers, if they're giving a seller 30 days, might just charge them what their rent would be or what their mortgage would be for 30 days. If you want to be competitive, a buyer might not charge them anything at all. If you are giving a seller 60 days, some buyers, to be competitive, don't charge, or they split the difference and charge for 1 month. Or if you're not in a competing situation, you're more likely to get away with being able to charge them for both payments of your mortgage. Just depends on how strong you want to make your offer, and really the situation you're in. What do the sellers need? How long has the home been on the market? All of that. Let's talk about a few of the terms. So there's several terms that can be filled out in this post-closing occupancy agreement. 3 that we'll touch on real quick. 1's going to be the security deposit, 2 is going to be renter's insurance, and 3 is going to be the utilities. Security deposit. Very important to have this in a rent back. It works the same way that a normal renter and landlord situation does. The seller, who's going to become the renter, will pay at closing a security deposit to the buyer, who becomes the landlord. The buyer will hold it until the rent back is over. And when they go to move in, look around, make sure everything's good to go. They didn't damage things on the way out. Same appliances are there. Cool. And then they'll send the security deposit back to the seller. And the next thing is going to be renter's insurance. Again, very important to have this in the contract. So at close, I write all my rent backs that at closing, proof of renter's insurance will be provided. So this is just in place so that the buyer knows if there's a fire in the home while they are the new owner, but they're not living in it yet or whatever, it's covered by insurance that's being paid for by the tenant who was the seller. And the last thing we'll talk about as a term is going to be the utilities. So it's pretty common for the seller to pay electric and gas, and it's common for the buyer to pay the water. Well, why is the buyer paying for the water if the seller's still there? This is because the water gets transferred into the buyer's name automatically at closing through the title company. So it just works out to be a little bit cleaner that buyers pay for the water. Now, if you're buying a home that has like 10 bathrooms or something like that, and you're worried it's going to be a high water bill and you don't want to pay it as a buyer, sure, then just write a little bit more of the cost into your original rent back. All right, so that's a little bit about what they are, what the costs of them are, and some of the terms. Last thing I'll say, this is really important for sellers to understand, why it's important to ask for the time if they need it or could be flexible on it. If they absolutely need 60 days, cool. Ask for the 60 days and see what you get. If you're flexible, maybe ask for 30 days, right? You don't want to deter a buyer from writing a contract. Let's say their lease is up in 2 months and it's going to be kind of tight. You don't want to miss the opportunity to get that buyer to write an offer on your home. And more importantly, and this is the more common conversation I end up having for a buyer, is that you understand you might find the right home and you might have to write 60 days of a rent back in order to be competitive and get it. This matters big time, especially if your lease is coming up. So this scenario, I'll tell you right now, this happens all the time. A buyer will say, my lease is up in 3 months, and so I'm getting ready to start. And I'll ask, have you heard of a rent back? And very often they're like, no, what is that? Or they've heard of them, they don't understand it. If you find the home this weekend and you write a 3-week contract and you have to give them 60 days for a rent back, all of a sudden you only have 1 week to move in before your lease is up. That's really tight. So it's important that buyers understand that these rentbacks it's very common for them to be out there, for a seller to be asking for them. So the point is, give yourself more time, get prepared ahead of time so that you know what you're doing, you know what to expect, how to write a strong offer, how to write a rentback as part of that offer, so you set yourself up for a better shot of getting the home you want under contract. All right. Well, that's going to do it for this short episode. What are rentbacks? I hope it was helpful for sellers and buyers. I'm Marco Randazzo with 8Z Real Estate, and thank you so much for listening or watching this real estate podcast, Sold by Marco.